Okay, so everything should be working, recording. Okay, so shh. So we saw before the break the example in which we started a very simple web server. Okay, we saw a very simple web server. Okay, that was named first example slides, right? Okay. So I started server ready, and we tested it. Somebody during the break asked me, how do I check if everything is working? Well, I open a browser, Chrome, Firefox, Safari, whatever, and I do what I do to navigate on a website. So I need to know the host name. In our case, it's localhost because we put the web server on the same computer where we have the client. So localhost is a short name for the same computer, and basically the operating system knows that it needs to search a server listening on a certain port on the same computer. And then, since we have only one computer, the only way in which we have to distinguish where the servers are listening to are TCP ports, okay? And so we use the 3000, just a conventional number. I mean, you can use any number. To use lower numbers, you need administrator privileges for historical reasons. But I mean, above 1000 something, any port can be used. Important thing is that nobody else, no other programs are using that port, okay? Otherwise, simply the server will not start. It says that the port is already in use, okay? So how do we access the server? Well, localhost with the colon, so 2 dots, vertical dots, and 3000. I cannot zoom that one, sorry. I can only zoom the rest. Oops. Oh, yeah, okay. And so that's the response of the server, okay? And so you see the server is still running. It waits for another request and so on, okay? On a generic server, I can take another client and do another request, and it will answer to the other request and so on, okay? Since we are on the same computer, the only request can only come from the same computer, okay? So it's a limitation, but it's also very convenient for the development. Okay, fine. So how does Express work? Okay, so well, we need to instantiate Express. So we need to create an object that basically is provided by the package, as you see here, const Express, require an app Express. And on this app, we have a set of methods. And with those methods, we can register new URLs to which the server will answer, okay? Exactly as we did here in this very example, okay? The simplest URL, the default URL is /, okay? That's what you get if you don't write anything after the 3000 in the browser, okay? The default is /. And the default method of the browser is get, okay? So the simplest method, the one that retrieves information, okay? And then what should we write? Well, we should write a function that decides what to do with the request. In this case, the answer is fixed, it's just a fixed string, and it's sent back as it is, okay? No format, no JSON, no HTML, nothing, okay? And it's just a demo, okay? So, in general, we need to write the name of the method, HTTP method, so we cannot just choose any method, okay? This has only 4 values, so get, post, put, delete for our case, okay? Apple doesn't really matter. A path, so that's a string, slash, or slash API, slash insert, slash list, slash shopping cart, slash whatever we want to use. we will talk about which is a good naming convention for the URLs in a minute. And then we need to pass a handler, so a callback, a function that handles the request. That's an asynchronous request by definition. I mean, the server starts and then it waits for requests. We don't know which request will arrive. When a request arrives, the server understands the request, so understand the method, the URL, decides which callback should be called. Okay? It's put in the callback queue and then it is executed. And the code will return something back to the requester, so back to the client. And now we will see this method, send, etc. Okay? So actually, you notice that we have a function with two parameters, rec, res. The previous one, that was an arrow function. Okay, but it's actually the same. And then we write the code. Inside this, these brackets, we can write code that use the request object, and in particular, we can use, for instance, the body part with dot body, etc., dot query, and so on. And then the rest, which is probably the most important one, because the rest, the response object, is the one that we use to send back something. Okay, so if we want to say, well, send back this information, of course, we need to use rest. And there are different methods, and the more useful ones are the one highlighted. That is, we send any kind of response, for instance, strings. Typically, you send back strings if you don't know what to do, because, I mean, it's something that can be easily interpreted. Okay? But in theory, you can send anything, an array of bytes and so on. Okay? Or you can ask for an object, a JavaScript object, to be converted into JSON. Okay? And this is done automatically by Express, because Express knows about JSON and it will do the conversion for us. And end, just to say, that's the end of the response. For instance, if you don't want to answer anything, because you have a URL that doesn't require a body for the response, you can simply say .end, and so this response will be sent back as it is. No body, you didn't add anything, and that's fine. Okay? So these are the four methods that we might use. Actually, the redirect it's not so common because I mean, we don't really redirect the browser. We have only one application running in the browser without reloading, without changing page. So actually, this redirect is not that useful. Okay? I mean, it has to be interpreted by JavaScript code, but at this point, you can send information also through the body. Okay? Not the HTTP status code of redirection. Okay, so this is the list. Send, I mean, as you see, it's not in body, it's just for the first experiment. Okay, and empty response if you didn't add anything. You can also set a status. I mean, if you don't set a status, there's a default status like 200 that says okay. Okay, or if you have an error and you would like to set explicitly a status, you need to set it through the number. Okay, so you cannot just write what was it, internal server error. Okay, you need to use the number 404 and stuff like that, and JSON, and of course this and JSON and so on. If there's no status set, it will have a default status set, as I told you. In case of no errors, 200 is fine. Okay, how to stop the server? I told you with Ctrl+C. Note, I mean, this should be known to you. I mean, it's basic knowledge from networking courses. Only one TCP server at a time can run on a specified host and port. Okay, in case you want to run two servers, an error will arise. Okay, there cannot be two servers listening on the same port, TCP port. Okay, this is just for convenience. In case you lost the terminal and the server is still running, you need to be able to find the process and terminate the process externally, and you don't have the Ctrl+C anymore if you lose the terminal. Okay, so just to show you. I mean, if we create a second terminal, QA server, week 3, QA server, node, first example slide. As you see, I mean, it doesn't run because the other server is still running, okay? In the other terminal, it's still running, so the address is already in use. I mean, address for TCP is host plus port, okay? Host is always the same because it's localhost. If we don't have another computer, it's localhost, and the port is the same, okay? But it might happen, no problem. You come here, and you stop the server, and the other will run, okay? But that's basic knowledge from networking courses, okay? Okay, fine. A few, I mean, some other information that might be useful for you to use Express is that we can insert middleware functions or other callbacks to be processed when we receive a request from the client. And so this app.method syntax takes a variable number of parameters. The last one is the callback that processes the request, but in the middle we can add functions, okay? Again, in the form of callbacks. This is JavaScript, so everything is a callback. And if we add in this way, functions in this way, basically this function will be called before the last one, and they might perform I mean, useful operations that are the same for every request, okay? Typically, I don't know, check the content type, check if the user is authenticated, stuff like that, okay? That's why they are called middlewares. It's a software that's between the request and the actual processing of the request in the middle. That's a signature. I mean, they give you get both rec and res, okay, and also next method that is passed to the function, and you need to call it to activate the next middleware function. So it's a bit manual. I mean, the mechanism, it means that in the end, in the function, you need to call next. Remember to call it. Actually, we will write very few middlewares. I mean, typically, we will write a middleware in the end of the course for authentication, you know, to handle authentication. But apart from that, I mean, typically we use middleware already prepared for us. Like a middleware can be a logging function. You want to log what's happening on the server. So every time you get a request, you want to write something in a file on the terminal and so on. That's the typical middleware. But again, it's difficult to write, and we use something which is already prepared for us, okay? And since sometimes we want to use middlewares for all requests that arrive, you can also tell directly app, that means Express, to use this middleware for every request. So we don't have to write it for every request, okay? So for every time we say get, post, put with some URLs, other URLs, and so on. So that's a way to say always use this middleware before calling the callbacks specific for the request. Okay, so let's see an example. Service static request. Express is a web server. I mean, it can also serve static files, but by default, it doesn't do anything. If I don't put this app get, I mean, you send a request and the server, yeah, it's ready, it's listening, but doesn't answer anything because you didn't tell Express to do anything, okay? So one of the common things you would like to do with web servers is just to serve all the files which are present in a certain folder in your computer, in the server. And this static middleware is meant to do this operation. Otherwise, you need to have a get for each single file, which is, of course, very, very inconvenient, okay? Just an example, okay? Let's see something. Yeah, and then we will go back. Something more useful for us. Logging. I mean, by default, Express does not log the received requests. So it's very inconvenient because, especially when you are developing, I mean, you don't know what's happening. Of course, you can open the browser developer tools, but if you have also another way to check what's happening on the server side, that would be nicer. Okay, every web server typically has a way to log a request. Okay, so there's a package again, another package that you can use to I mean to log requests. Okay, so I think the other server we have it. What's the index, right? You see Morgan, and then this app use Morgan. Okay, so let me just try. I mean, let's stop this server. We can also, yeah, get rid of one of the terminals so it's not too confused. So node index. Okay, so this is a more complex server. You see, there's much more code here. Okay. I mean, not that much, but there are 3 API, maybe 4. Okay. Let me try again to make the request. So localhost 3000. Oh, 3000. Yeah, unable to connect. Actually, I started it on another port, I think. It was 3001. Okay. So 3001. Hello. Okay. That's the response, because we have a get for slash send hello. But you see here the logging, okay? But just the logging. It's a middle. It's a function that gets called every time there's a request that arrives to the server. Okay? It's just convenient. You can also see, you know, some other requests. Nowadays, the browsers do a lot of things, okay? Like automatically, when you access the first time a new site, they look for some URLs, like this icon that is the icon, you know, that appears here, okay, in some websites. So I mean, just I mean, a convenient stuff. But of course, we didn't put anything there. You see also the HTTP status code is 404. Okay, so not found. Okay, that's nothing. It's okay. I mean, the browser doesn't complain, and you know, it just doesn't show any specific icon. Okay, so let's go back. You know, URLs can be quite complex. Sometimes you use web application, you see long URLs, very complex URLs. Especially, there can be a variable part in the URL. Sometimes you see this symbol, a question mark in the URLs. Okay, and I just want to draw your attention to the fact that Express is quite flexible in handling URLs, and it parses the URLs for you. So it divides the URLs on critical characters, on specific characters like question mark, that is followed by query strings and so on, where you can represent some simple type of information. And you can find the information that is being extracted by the URLs in some special fields that are the same that we saw before. Right? These ones in the request object, like for instance, rec query that is useful for the URL. Okay, and this does not require any middleware. And you can also process content in the body, but this typically requires a middleware. So again, app user and so on. But I mean, we will provide code for you to handle these cases. I mean, typically we use Express JSON because we said we use JSON. Okay, and so basically it parses the string that represents the JSON, and it gives in the body directly an object that corresponds to the representation in JSON. Okay, but that's an example later when we talk about JSON. Paths, I mean, URLs can also be specified in a parametric way, quite complex way. I mean, in case you want to have the same callback answer different paths. I mean, like there's something that starts with A, B, and ends with C, D, and so on. You can write very complex expression, but I would say typically they are not needed in our course, and just focus on what is actually needed, okay? We will try to keep your URL simple, okay? But there can be variable parts in the URL, like give me the information about object number, user number, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, okay? And I don't want to write a callback for each possible number of user. Of course, it would be useful. We don't know them in advance, and it's so inconvenient, okay? So there can be parametric parts of the URL, and they are introduced by the colon symbol, okay, so the 2 dots. And they are matched directly by Express, so you don't have to do anything. You just have to decide the schema of the URL, so how the URL is composed. And then, if the URL matches what you wrote here, you find in rec.params directly the value as interpreted by Express for you, extracting the actual value that you have in the URL and putting it into a variable that you can directly use in the code. Okay, so like you see app-get users colon user ID books colon book ID, and we call it with user 34 books 8999, and then in the code you have rec.parents.user ID that will be 34. Just be careful, it's a string, it's a URL, okay, in case you need to convert it into a number. It's JavaScript, okay, parse int whatever, or maybe using it as a string is still fine because it's just something that you use in a query, okay? I mean, I don't know. Okay, so this is important to remember because this will be used quite a lot, okay? Because typically we have URLs that have variable parts, which are the IDs that are often stored in a database, or maybe they identify the objects that we need to handle, okay? Okay, logging, we already saw the logging. There's other 2 middlewares that we use later in the course. That the course to enable cross-origin resource sharing, there will be a lecture about this. I mean, part of the lecture. And then at the end, we will use Passport, which is another middleware, quite large one, that we will use for authentication. We will not implement all stuff needed for authentication, but only the part that are more significant for us, okay? But for the moment, I mean, we just use Morgan, that is nice to for debugging requests, okay? So that's more or less what we need to know about the servers. I think we can see in the example. Yes. You see, API questions, ID answers, okay? That's a quite complex URL, but you see the .id, okay? And the .id is used here, recparams.id, okay? And ID is just a name I chose, okay? It can be any string. Important thing is that it's between question slash and slash answers. What is inside there? It will be matched by Express in ID and will be made available to the code in recparams.id because I chose the name ID. Okay? Okay, good. So I think we can move to the last part of today's lecture, that is APIs. Okay? So APIs, that's a joke in Italian. Okay? Anyway. So in short, now we are missing, what we need between the application, so the client, the front end, and the server. Okay, where we have the database, we have some services, so operation that we allow the client to perform through URLs, HTTP URLs. and we need to decide how to communicate, so how to encode the information, and how to construct these URLs. Okay, and that's the topic of this block of slides. So I already say that in this course we encode the information using JSON because it's very simple. It's very similar to the JavaScript syntax and so on. So again, we don't have to learn many new things. And so what's JSON? JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Okay, it's a lightweight data interchange format. So basically, it's a way of representing complex data with a text-based syntax that can be easily read by humans. It's not that efficient, that's true, as any text-based representation, but it's simple to use. Okay, it's a subset of JavaScript syntax for object literals. So basically, you open the bracket as a curly bracket as you do to create an object in JavaScript, and that's the same syntax in JSON. You want an array, a list of things in JSON, you open a square bracket, and so on. Okay, so it's easy for humans to read and write, and easy for machine to parse and generate. Okay, media type you already saw, application JSON. There's a content type in the HTTP request and response. And well, this is the form and definition and so on. So basically, there are primitive types here as well. Strings, numbers, true, false, null. Okay, that's not JavaScript. That's not undefined here. Okay, there are no functions as well. It's a data representation format, so it doesn't represent functions or code and stuff. Okay, it just represents two composite types: arrays, let's say ordered list of things, and objects, list of key value pairs, like in JavaScript, more or less. So keys are always strings. So this is a data representation format. So we cannot put variables. It doesn't make sense. Okay, and just make sure that strings are double quoted, not single quoted. JavaScript supported single quoted, double quoted, and also the backtick. JSON just double quotes. Okay. Example, that's an object. There are a few keys, first name, last name, address, and so on. The first two are strings. Then there is a more complex object. So the third one is an object inside another one. That's fine, which has 4 fields. You can also have numbers. You see, numbers don't have quotes. Okay, they're numbers. So this is not a string, but a number. I mean, probably with the meaning might be a string, but I mean, we have a number, we can transmit a number. And phone numbers, and that's a list, ordered list, so what we call an array in JavaScript. And you can transmit lists as well, okay? And you can compose these values as you like. You can just have a primitive type, so a single string double quoted, it's a valid JSON, like a number, without the quotes, or you can have more complex type. You typically have lists or objects, okay? Because of course you want to transmit some information that is useful, and I mean just a number typically is not enough. There are methods available directly in JavaScript to perform the conversion one way and the other. This JSON is a predefined object in JavaScript, in modern JavaScript, okay? I think in ES6 it's already present, if I'm not wrong. So there's two static methods. One is stringify, that by the way can be also useful for debugging, because you can pass any variable to stringify and it will be converted into a JSON representation. So basically, if it's an object, it will print all the content of all the properties of the object. Okay? So sometimes it's nice to print for printing stuff. Okay? Just for debugging. But I mean, in our case, we will use mostly to convert the information in the server before returning this information to the client. Okay? Because we need to have the JSON format, because that's what we decided, just a choice of for our course. Okay? Another possible choice could be XML. I'm not sure if you already saw XML, you like XML. I mean, it's more verbose and more difficult to read, I think JSON is fine, is well supported, is very similar to JavaScript, so that's why we chose JavaScript as a format. Okay, and by the way, a lot of websites nowadays use JSON, really in production. And there is also a method parse that takes a string and will create a corresponding object in JavaScript. Okay, so if just a number, a string, we can return a number string, or if it's an object or an array, we return an object or an array. Okay, well, this can be simply ignored. Okay, it's a basic JavaScript object. Then we have, okay, the JSON, and we need the URL representing what we are going to do on the server. So we need a way to design URLs. So what we are going to write after get, post, put, delete. So what follows here is just a suggestion. Okay? So I mean, there are also standards. You might have heard about REST and stuff like that. I mean, we don't really require REST for the exam because we think it's a bit outside of the scope of the course. Okay, it's just a way of composing URLs in a more standardized way. But I mean, for us, the important thing is the method that you're using. That should be the correct one. So remember all the discussion about the post. And then a reasonable URL, something that is meaningful for you and for the ones who read the code. Okay, I mean, in this course, you are doing the project yourself, alone, and that's fine. But when you go working with colleagues and so on, you need to have, you know, some standardized way to communicate and try not to use stupid names and stuff like that. So if you stick to some common sense rules, it's better. Okay, and here we will give you some common sense rules, mostly derived from REST, but I mean, it's not really important. So we invite you to, you know, define yours in this way. When you have a collection, so a list of object items or stuff that you need to handle in your application, just use the name. Okay, so like students, courses, whatever you want to use for your application, cars, I don't know. When you need to represent single items in a collection, so in a list, you use the name of the list that you previously defined and an identifier, so slash with identifier, like students with the student number, student ID, and so on. Courses, it is its course code. Car, maybe as a license plate, and so on. Okay, so if the object has its own unique identifier, that's fine. Otherwise, probably you have a unique identifier in some ways in your application. Often that's the unique identifier in the database. Okay, sometimes you have a number, you don't really have a meaning for that number, it's just the identifier in the database on the server. Okay, that's fine. Okay, best practices. Try to use nouns and not verbs, because the verbs actually are the HTTP methods. What we are going to do are the HTTP methods. They already been defined. I mean, they suggest you use plural nouns, so you remember it's a list. And concrete names, not abstract names. Items, I mean, everything is an item. Everything is an object. So it's really not so useful. I mean, you should be a bit more specific. Of course, that depends a lot on the application. Okay. For instance, in a shopping cart, you might have items. Yeah, maybe you can call them, I don't know, cart items or something like this. Okay, just to avoid items, these very generic names that can be anything else in the application. Okay. But again, I mean, this is just best practices. Express doesn't really care about the name you use. I mean, it just matches the URL. Okay. And then you have the operations, and the operations are the ones defined by the HTTP method. Actually, I mean, the operation, I mean, from the point of view of the application, are not the ones of the HTTP methods. I mean, the HTTP methods are just a way to achieve those operations. The operations are retrieve data, add data, update data, delete data, search data, okay? Modify data, not that different from update, and so on, okay? So they depend on the application. Some manipulation of the data, okay? And the point is that we need to map these operations that are defined by how we want the application to work on HTTP methods and URLs. So that's the point of defining our APIs, what is called here service endpoints, using another terminology, okay? And what we can do is basically what you see here. So we can categorize the operation that we are going to do in these 5 actions, okay? So we have 4 HTTP methods, and basically another dimension that is we are working on both the either on the list of things, a list of items, list of objects, and so on on the collection, or we are working on single elements, okay? And so you can have get, so retrieve information, and if you are specifying the collection, you might want to get the information about the whole collection, so all the items, all the elements in the collection. But if you specify the URL, again with get, but slash with an ID, so the student ID, the car license plate, and so on, you might want to retrieve only the information specific to that element, okay, single element. Regarding the creation of new elements, sometimes the user input data and you need to store it in the database. So there's something new to be created. Well, that's the typical case of the post method in HTTP, okay? Post is not idempotent. That means every time we run it, we change something on the server. And when the outcome on the server will be different, there will be something in addition, usually, okay? And so when you post on a URL that represents a collection, that's our recommendation again. You should use this method and URL to add a new element in the collection, okay? So you don't add to a single element. It's another element in the collection. You don't really add to a car another car, right? You add to the list of cars another car, okay? So you add to the collection. So use the post on the URL of the collection. And it doesn't make sense to add to a specific element, okay? At least in this basic example in which we still have one single collection, okay? Put, we say it's for updating information. Well, we don't really want to update a whole collection of stuff. I mean, in principle, it could be done, but we typically update information only on single object, one object at a time, one item at a time. And so we replace and we update the values of properties, one or more properties of a single element, okay? So we typically do put on, let's say, courses slash a course code. We update some information about a user, okay, on a specific user characterized by an ID, okay? Put slash user slash 123, okay? And we update the address, home address, okay? Delete, again, you don't want typically to delete the whole collection, you just want to delete a single element. So again, you use the same URL. You just change the method, the URL, the HTTP method. Put to update information, modify information, replace information, and delete to delete the element. Okay? So, I mean, this schema should cover most of the cases, okay? If not all cases, for a single collection, okay? You might want to personalize a little bit the get URL if you want only a partial extraction of information. That's what the query is meant for, but there's an example later. But I mean, apart from that, everything should be mapped here. So this is just an example. Let's say a list of dogs. Your application handles dogs. Okay, so you are in a dog clinic and you need to handle dogs. Okay, each dog has its own ID. Okay, and so if you need to retrieve information about a specific dog, okay, get dogs and the ID. If you need a list of dogs, just get on dogs. If you need to add a new one, post on dogs. Okay, and it doesn't make sense to post on a certain ID because it doesn't create a new dog on an existing one. Okay. Put, again, we try to avoid on the collection, and we can update information about a certain element, a certain dog in this case. Okay, the address of the owner. Okay, the telephone number, whatever. The name of the, I mean, the name typically doesn't change, but it doesn't matter. The delete, I mean, the dog has died, sorry, and we remove it. Okay. Or the dog is not a client of the clinic anymore, okay? And so we remove it. So delete dogs with an ID, okay? There are a lot of suggestions how to create, URLs for APIs. Each big organization typically has one. Let's see, I mean, yeah, these are the suggestions by Google. But I mean, we don't really need to care about this. It's just to let you know that when you go in a business environment, in a big organization and so on, probably there are guidelines you're required to follow. Okay, for your project, maybe if you stick to our advice, that's better. But I would say mostly for you, because they try to limit the errors that can be made. Okay. Let's come to a more complex case. I mean, not everything can be modeled just a single list, a single collection, right? So, like students at the university have a number of courses that they need to attend, okay? So each student has its own list of courses. So how can we query, ask for the list of courses of a specific student? I mean, a collection is not enough, right? Because there's the concept of student, there's an idea of student, of a specific student, and there's the fact that we don't want the information about the student, about the courses, which is another collection. For instance, typically a table, another table in the database. Well, that's a good way to represent this information in the URL. Collection, the identifier in the collection, and the relationship. Okay, in this case, it's just courses. It doesn't mean the list of all courses in the university, but the courses which are attended by a certain student. Can also be the opposite. I mean, all the students enrolled in a course. Okay, and here you see the ID of the collection on the left, so the ID of the course. Okay, this is just advice. Okay, so if you stick to these rules, I mean, the chance that you create a really good and readable code is very high. Okay. Okay. Let's see a even more complex example. We saw the get before, and let's say, okay, there's a list of elements in the collection we want to retrieve, but often we are not interested in the whole list. Okay, think about a very large list. I want only something that contains a certain pattern, certain name. So do a search on the content of this list. Or I just want a certain number of elements. Okay, limit the number of elements you are going to give me. Okay, because I'm interested only in the first 2 elements, and so on. Okay, this depends a lot on the application. There's no generic general rule. I mean, depends on what you're going to do with your application. Okay, like the list, the elements in the collection might have properties. You want to filter on some properties. Okay, and this cannot be easily expressed with URLs. I mean, in practice, yes, you can, because you control the whole space of the URL, so you can define specific URLs. That's fine. But, I mean, that's what we suggest. Again, if you use the question mark, basically, you have the flexibility to put whatever you want afterward. With this syntax, actually, the syntax is standardized. It's the query syntax. So the and between these couples that are key equal value, okay? And if we go back, no, it's the last set of slides. I mean, the previous set of slides. So it's 2. You remember that, you see, you find this query already separated, I mean, the part after the question mark, in the variable rec query on the server side, and these elements in the object query will be the names that you used here after the question mark. And there can be a variable number of them, okay? So you're not constrained by having a fixed URL. It can be a variable URL where you add key value pairs depending on your need, okay? And actually, it will be handled from by the same callback in your server code, okay? Because it's always the same get, and what you map in your server code is the part before the question mark. What is after the question mark will map always on the same get, okay? So where did we have the get? Yeah, up method and the path. Yeah, it will always map on this part, and this part is the part before the question mark, okay? Of course, you don't typically have slash question mark because this is the basic URL, and typically here you have the starting page and stuff like that, okay? So you typically have something more and then the question mark. Okay, let's go back to the other slides. Yes. So for more complex situations, you have a way to handle them, okay? Which is actually the way that is used by most websites around, okay? Nothing really invented here. Okay, and then last thing you need to have is a way to return errors. I mean, if everything is fine, you get the JSON object with an array and an object directly if it's a single item and so on. If an error happens, well, we saw there are status codes of HTTP that you can use. 404, okay, not found. Well, if it's not found, I mean, probably there's not that much you can say. But maybe there's some other problems that require an explanation, or it's better to give some additional information. Well, you can return information in the body for basically any request, right? We saw get, post, put, and delete. All of them support the body in the response, right? So just encode some information about the error in the body. And since we started with JSON, basically just define a format in JSON, so an object with some specific properties that you would like to use in your application to describe the errors. And then on the client, you will decide how to use it, okay? Just make sure you only return what the user can see, okay? You don't want to return information that is not supposed to be seen by the user, because this stuff goes to the user, goes back to the client, and everything that goes back to the client becomes known by who is using the application. Either you show it or you don't show it. If you don't show it, I don't care, because at the exam, but also hackers and people like this, I mean, they just inspect the network connection, right? So everything you send back is here, okay? That's a standard browser. It's not the hackers browser or crackers browser, okay? That's a basic browser that you install with your Linux distribution, Windows, and so on. I mean, if you send it to the client, it's known to the one who is using the website. Anybody Okay, anybody on the internet that can connect to the website and can get a response. So if you need to make sure that the information doesn't go to the client, you need to stop it before sending it back to the client. Okay, regardless of who and where is the client, you cannot trust the client. Okay, indeed, to trust the client, we need an additional mechanism. We need authentication and stuff. That is the last topic of the course. Okay, good. So, but in case, sometimes it's useful. I mean, do you like websites when they say, I mean, you do an operation and they just say error? What's error? What I did wrong? I mean, a little bit of information is useful. Also for the exam. I mean, sometimes, I mean, the exam is a particular situation, right? I mean, you're supposed to do something reasonable, and no particular error should arise unless it's, you know, it's specified in the text and so on. But I mean, in general, if there are errors, like, I mean, it's not the user's fault, it's fine, okay, but I mean, tell the user it's not his or her fault. I mean, database connection error, try again later, okay? Try again later. That's a possible message you can give back to the user. There's nothing wrong, okay? There's some temporary problem. I mean, it happens all the time on the Politecnico website, right? Okay. Or maybe there are other problems. I mean, incorrect request, or maybe in some cases you want to be more specific. I mean, the zip code is not in a valid format. Your address is invalid, something specific of the application, depending on the request that the user did. Okay, that's reasonable. Okay, and that can be sent back through JSON in this body of the response. And any method supports sending the body. Okay, so good. So API design is a bit difficult, right? I mean, it's one of the things that are evaluated at the exam, but also because, as I told you, they are the way in which we start building the application, right? So we first decide how the server and client communicate, and then we build the rest. And that should be the first thing on which we focus our attention, also for preparing the exam and so on. Okay, and indeed, it's one of the first things that comes in the list of the labs, right? So next lab and the one after. Yeah, practical guidance, we already saw it. So how do we implement APIs in Express? Well, actually, you already understood it. I mean, they are just a regular HTTP request. We just need to define the URL. The methods are already there. I mean, HTTP methods, get, post, put, delete. We use parametric URLs because they are so convenient. That's Express, okay? So this is specific for Express package. Other languages might have other systems, like if you are designing stuff in PHP, it's different, Java is different, and so on, okay? Depending on the frameworks, libraries, and so on that you're using. This is Express, so we are going to see things in Express now. Okay, request and response body. We would like to use JSON. So we are lucky because Express supports the JSON, but we need to remember to use the middleware Express JSON before we start Express. Okay, app use Express JSON. It will be provided in the script, in the JavaScript that we give to you. I mean, it's already there on the website. On the response side, well, we already saw there's a method JSON on REST, the response object. Just use it, okay, and pass the values that you would like to give back to the client. So you have a variable that contains an object and so on. Just pass the variable, and the JSON will do the rest. Okay. Also, we need not to forget to validate input parameters, but that's next lecture. Okay, not Monday, next Thursday. Okay. Okay, so let's see the implementation of some of the methods, basic methods that we saw before. You remember the get for the collection and the item, and the post for the collection where we create a new element. So collection get, well, up get slash answer. That's a list of answers. The callback, list answers. DAO, that's an object that contains a number of functions that we separated in another place that basically goes to do the queries, the SQL queries on the database. Okay, just to keep the code clean and not write too much stuff here. Okay, and you remember this is an asynchronous operation, right? So it returns a promise. We made the function in a way that returns a promise, and then we use the value of the promise with the .then. You can do it with the await as well. Okay, that's another option. Answers, and then we need to send it back. I mean, of course, you can do console log, whatever for debugging, but then rest JSON. I mean, there's already a list of answers. It's an array, that's fine. Pass it to the JSON method, it will be converted in a JSON format and sent back as the response body of the HTTP response. Okay. That's a get, that's fine, that's easy. Okay. Get for the element, get answers slash colon ID. Okay. So when we receive a request for answers 3, this 3 is automatically put by Express in rec params, and we can use it. We can pass it to a function that goes into the database and does SQL query, select, etc., where answer ID equal to question mark. You remember to use the question mark, and then we pass the ID as a parameter that will be mapped on the question mark. Okay, and then we get the answer from the database again as a promise. Answer, rest JSON answer. Okay, easier, right? We don't have to parse the URL. Okay, Express is there for helping us. Let's come to the post, more complex one. Most complex one probably. App post slash answers. So it's exactly the same URL, but the server doesn't get confused. I mean, the protocol also carries the method. Okay, so there's no possibility of confusion. If the request doesn't match the method and the URL, Express will simply not answer. Okay, so it's very simple. Nothing comes back. Okay, and then there's the callback to be called. Const answer, we take from the body the content, and then we go to the database and we perform an operation that insert information. Here, probably not be. It will not be a select. It will be an insert. Insert into answers, values, whatever. Okay, title, question, etc. Okay. What's the point here? Rec body. Rec body here is used as a JavaScript object, but that's fine, because if we use the Express JSON middleware that has to be used like this, that can be done only. That needs to be done only once at the beginning of your file. Okay, so you tell Express before registering any URL to use the Express JSON middleware. If the request comes saying content type application JSON, the middleware will come in, will look at the content, and will interpret it as a JSON, and will create an object that corresponds to the JSON representation. It will be already made available in rec body. Okay, so rec body will be already a JavaScript object corresponding to what is contained in the body of the HTTP request. So everything is being done automatically. Okay, so that's good, right? And yeah, that's empty. We say that, I mean, we don't do this case. So let's just do a little bit of testing and then you can leave. I know there's a seminar, right? I hope I can come. I think I pass in the office and then I come as well. Testing the HTTP APIs is really nice, but how do we test it? Okay, so we just tested that get with the browser. That's not the most convenient way, because the browser, yes, it's true, it can test something. Let's try. Okay, so I think, yeah, 2001 was API questions, right? So just to see what I did, header was localhost API questions. Okay, that's a URL I wrote here in the code. API questions. Okay, to perform GET operation, the browser is fine. Because the browser, when you type in the URL bar, it performs a GET operation. Okay? But how do you do a POST? You need an application. Okay? Now, we also have another way. Okay? The one suggested in the slide. No, with the other slide, whatever it is. Okay, that's an extension for Visual Studio Code, this one. Just click install this extension. You just write a TXT file with extension HTTP and you separate your request. I mean, you write it as a text. I already did everything, okay? So if you have the extension installed, you see this REST client. That's one of the possible ones. This one works well, so that's what we suggest. When you write a file .http, you have a button, sort of button here. You have the server running, right? And then send the request. You will see the response here. You see the status, the headers, and the content. So we can debug a little bit. And especially, we can send the post one. Post. Okay? We will send, remember, we need to add a header here. We need to say that the content type is application JSON. That's mandatory here. Because otherwise the server will not know. Okay? And then we need to specify the body. It was not present with the GET. Body is not present with GET. And then here we get the response. And in this case, the response was just the ID that the database has created for us. Okay? So if you look at the database, hopefully, yeah, there's a new ID, 5. Okay, with the new content and so on. So there's a new row there. Okay, and if you go to the old one, you see there was just 4. Okay, and so the post was successful. So you can experiment a little bit with the APIs, and that's what you are required to do in Next Lab. Okay, installing Express, writing a little bit of code on the server side, and try it from the client side. That means basically from Visual Studio Code. Okay, so I think that's all for today, right? Yeah. So if you have any questions, I'm still here. Otherwise, I will probably meet at the seminar later. Okay? Oh, yeah, that's a question.
Why you got the 5? Yes, it's the ID button.
No, it's just a possibility. I mean, it's not mandatory. 5, it's just a possibility of something that is useful to the client that you can return. You could return the whole object, okay? Just to... No, I mean, the 5 is decided by the database. It comes from the database. If I do it again, you get 6 or 7 or whatever the database decides. It's stored, but it's computed by the database, not sent. You see, it's not in the list. It's returned to the client, just in case later it is useful for querying, the object. So you know the idea of the new object in case you want to query for the object. Okay? You're welcome. Okay.